Welcome to Short Story Stash. In today's riveting tale, a devoted midwife named Eira makes a life-altering decision to protect a newborn princess from a ruthless queen. As Eira raises the child in secret, betrayal lurks in the shadows as the princess grows into a young woman, unaware of her true identity. Discover a captivating story of sacrifice, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her adopted daughter in this thrilling audiobook experience.
The bell's clamour shattered the tranquil night. The guards gave chase as I cradled the newborn princess close to my chest. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Ice flooded my veins, contradicting the determined fire burning in my gut. My grip on the child tightened, my knuckles white. The queen's gaze haunted me as I fled, her anguished expression seared into my memory. The queen's eyes, once filled with the warmth of a mother-to-be, had turned cold and calculating as they fixated on the innocent babe in my arms. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a subtle sneer tugging at the corners of her mouth. My breath caught in my throat as the queen's chilling command reached my ears. 3 words, spoken with icy detachment, sealed the fate of the helpless infant nestled against my breast. "Kill the child," she declared, her voice devoid of maternal warmth or compassion. Eira's posture stiffened, her shoulders squared and her chin lifted, exuding an aura of dominance and control. She took a step forward, her movements precise and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. The air around her seemed to crackle with an unspoken threat, a silent warning that this tiny, helpless creature was nothing more than an obstacle in her path to absolute power. In that moment, I saw the depths of Eira's ruthlessness, a chilling realization that she would stop at nothing to maintain her influence, even if it meant seeing her own flesh and blood as a rival to be eliminated. The words echoed in the cavernous hall, each syllable a hammer blow against my sanity. I gaped at the queen, a cold dread slithering down my spine. My gaze darted from her glacial visage to the babe nestled against my chest. The infant, oblivious, cooed and grasped at the air, a tiny fist brushing against my tear-stained cheek. The weight of the child felt heavier than stone, a precious life entrusted to me in the face of unimaginable cruelty. A defiant fire ignited within me, burning away my terror. My trembling fingers stilled against the infant's soft swaddling. For the first time, I met the queen's gaze, no flinch in my eye. I cradled the princess closer, as though shielding her from the darkness swirling within those once familiar eyes. My chin lifted. "This child is under my protection. I will not fail her." My mind raced, a trapped animal searching for a way out of this nightmarish situation. The palace walls seemed to close in around me, each stone pressing against my ribs. I glanced down at the princess, her tiny face scrunched up, and a surge of resolve washed over me. I had to find a way out. With a split-second decision that would forever alter the course of my life, I clutched the baby tightly to my chest and fled. My feet carried me through the palace corridors, the echoes of my footsteps reverberating off the stone walls like a frantic heartbeat. The weight of the princess in my arms served as a constant reminder of the immense responsibility I had taken upon myself. Behind me, the shouts of the royal guard grew louder, their heavy boots pounding against the floor in pursuit. The sound of their approach sent a jolt of adrenaline surging through my veins, propelling me forward with a desperate urgency. My heart pounded against my chest like a caged bird desperate for freedom as I frantically searched for an escape route. The sound of the guards' footsteps grew louder behind me, their heavy boots echoing off the stone walls in a relentless pursuit. Sweat beaded on my brow, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps as I clutched the baby princess tightly to my chest. I scanned my surroundings and spotted a hidden door behind a tapestry. Cradling the baby, I lunged for it, my sweaty fingers struggling with the rusted latch. "Come on," I whispered, my plea mingling with my pounding heart. The princess stirred, her whimpers a reminder of the fragile life I held. The guards' voices grew closer, their shouts echoing through the corridors like the baying of bloodthirsty hounds. I could almost feel their hot breath on the back of my neck, the phantom sensation sending shivers down my spine. I wrenched open the door with a gasp, its rusted hinges groaning. Relief flooded me at the sight of the dark, narrow passage. The damp stone and stale air smelled like freedom compared to the choking fear I'd felt before. With a final burst of strength, I pulled the door shut behind me, the latch clicking into place with a resounding finality. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the soft whimpers of the baby princess nestled in my arms. As I stumbled out of the narrow, damp passageway, my chest heaved with each desperate gasp for air. The musty atmosphere of the catacombs filled my lungs, a real difference to the fresh, perfume-filled air of the palace corridors. My heart pounded against my ribs, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the urgency of our situation. I carefully adjusted my grip on the child, ensuring that she was safe and comfortable in my arms. Her warmth and weight were a constant reminder of the precious cargo I carried, and I knew that I would stop at nothing to protect her. My voice, a rough whisper in the stale air, reached the child. "You need a name, little one." I pressed her against my pounding heart. "One to anchor you, to carve your place in this shadowed world." A flicker of candlelight painted the weathered stones. In that flicker, a name whispered, a name carried on the dust of ages. "Nyx," I said softly, the name falling from my lips like a sacred mantra. "Henceforth you shall be Nyx, named for the night that shrouds us, for the shelter it provides. You will be as adaptable as darkness, cloaking you as a secret only known to stars." My gaze fell upon the sleeping princess, tiny fingers curled around the tattered fabric of my cloak. A knot of determination twisted in my chest, my jaw clenched. No harm would come to her on my watch. "I promise you, Nyx." I whispered her new name, feeling the weight of destiny it carried. "I will guard you with my life and raise you as my own. No harm will come to you as long as I draw breath." The weight of my words settled upon me like a sacred oath, binding me to this tiny life in a way I had never experienced before. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and dangers, but I was ready to face them all for the sake of this innocent child. Days turned into weeks. The catacombs became our sanctuary, a hidden world where Nyx and I could live and grow together. The ancient stone walls, once cold and foreboding, now felt like a warm embrace, sheltering us from the dangers that lurked above. The years passed as I nurtured Nyx, sharing our world's secrets and our people's wisdom. Her eyes sparkled with understanding, her questions poured forth, and I delighted in satisfying her curiosity, our voices echoing through the chambers. Nyx's pure laughter became our symphony, filling the catacombs with joy that seeped into the very stone. In the mornings, we would sit together, poring over old books and scrolls that I had managed to salvage from the palace library. I taught her to read and write, to speak with eloquence and grace, and to think critically about the world around her. She was a quick learner, her mind sharp and eager to absorb every scrap of knowledge I could offer. Through it all, our bond only grew stronger. Nyx became the daughter I'd always longed for, and I the mother she had never known. We were a family bound by love and the shared secret of her true identity. As I hurried through the dark, winding streets of the city's underbelly with a sleeping Nyx cradled in my arms, my heart pounded against my chest. The distant sound of heavy footsteps and clanking armor echoed through the narrow alleys, a haunting reminder that the king's agents were closing in on us. I ducked into a hidden alleyway, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the cold, damp stone wall. Nyx stirred slightly in my arms, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort before settling back into a peaceful slumber. I looked down at her, my heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. How could I keep her safe in a world that sought to destroy her? The weight of the impossible choice I had to make settled heavily upon my shoulders, threatening to crush me under its burden. My hands shook as I fumbled through my satchel, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of a small, ornate box. The intricate carvings on its surface seemed to dance in the faint moonlight that filtered through the alleyway. For a brief moment, I found myself transfixed, my fingers hovering mere inches above the latch, as if frozen by an unseen force. The weight of the decision pressed down upon me. But with a deep breath, I pushed through my hesitation and opened the box, the soft click of the latch echoing through the silent night. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft velvet, lay a pendant bearing the royal crest. The gold glinted in the dim light, the intricate design of the crest, a stark reminder of Nyx's true heritage. I gently lifted the pendant from its resting place, the weight of it in my palm a tangible representation of the secret I had been carrying for so long. As I stood there, lost in thought, a sudden movement at the entrance of the alleyway caught my eye. I whirled around, clutching Nyx tighter to my chest as a tall, imposing figure emerged from the shadows. Theron Blackleg, the King's chief investigator, stood before me, his steel blue eyes boring into mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He was dressed in dark, well-tailored clothing that bore the King's insignia, his posture rigid and unyielding. "Eira Silverheart," he said, his voice crisp and commanding, "you have something that belongs to the crown." My face turned white, frozen with only the sweat moving down my brow, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had to protect Nyx no matter the cost. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice steady despite my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. Theron took a step closer, his gaze never wavering from mine. "Don't play games with me, midwife. I know what child you carry." I hugged Nyx closer to my chest, as if my embrace alone could shield her from the danger that loomed before us. "The child is mine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let you take her." Theron's eyes narrowed and I saw a flicker of something in their depths. Anger, perhaps, or frustration. "You have no right to keep her from her true family," he said, his tone cold and unyielding. "The Queen demands her return." My head shoot back and forth, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "I can't," I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. "I made a promise to protect her." Theron's hand moved to the hilt of his sword, and I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my veins. I knew I couldn't outrun him, not with Nyx in my arms. But I couldn't just stand there either. My fingers twitched at my side, aching for a weapon I didn't carry. I glanced around the alleyway, searching for an escape route. The walls were high and smooth, offering no handholds or footholds. The only way out was past Theron, and I knew he would never let us pass. With a sudden burst of speed, I lunged forward, catching Theron off guard. I slammed into him with all my might, sending him stumbling backward. As he struggled to regain his balance, I darted past him, my feet pounding against the cobblestones as I ran. I could hear Theron's shouts behind me, his footsteps growing louder as he gave chase. I wove through the narrow streets, ducking and dodging around corners and obstacles. I could hear my heart in my ears. Nyx began to stir in my arms, her eyes fluttering open as she sensed the urgency of our flight. "Mama," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Hush, little one," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're going on an adventure." I rounded a corner, my eyes scanning the street ahead for any sign of escape. And then I saw it, a narrow alleyway, barely wide enough for a person to pass through. I darted toward it, my heart leaping with hope. As I squeezed through the narrow opening, I felt Theron's fingers brush against my back, his hand grasping at empty air with strands of my hair in them as I slipped out of his reach. I heard him curse under his breath, his voice filled with frustration and anger. I didn't stop running, even as the alleyway opened up into a wider street. I could hear Theron's footsteps behind me, growing fainter with each passing second. I knew he wouldn't give up easily, but I had bought myself some time. I ducked into another alleyway, then another, weaving a complex path through the city's underbelly. My lungs burned with the effort of running, and my arms ached from the weight of Nyx's sleeping form. Finally, when I was certain I had lost Theron, I slowed to a walk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked down at Nyx, her face peaceful and serene in the dim light of the alleyway. "I'm sorry, little one," I whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Theron would never stop searching for us. I had to find a way to keep her safe, to hide her away from the world until she was old enough to understand the truth of her heritage." As I approached the entrance to the Thieves' Guild, the nondescript door, concealed in the shadows of the narrow alleyway, seemed to blend seamlessly into the weathered stone walls. I hesitated for a moment, glancing over my shoulder to ensure we hadn't been followed, before raising my fist and knocking urgently. The sound of my knocking echoed through the alleyway, and for a moment, the only response was a tense silence. Then a gruff, suspicious voice emanated from behind the door. "Who goes there? State your business." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry as I clutched Nyx tighter to my chest. "The shadows whisper secrets," I responded, my voice trembling slightly as I uttered the coded phrase that would grant us entry. There was a pause, and then the sound of a heavy bolt being drawn back. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit passageway. I stepped inside, my eyes straining to adjust to the sudden change in light. As I made my way deeper into the guild's headquarters, I found myself surrounded by a group of wary, battle-hardened individuals. Their eyes narrowed as they assessed Nyx and me, their hands resting on the hilts of their concealed weapons. The air was thick with tension and the acrid scent of smoke. I was led into a small, dimly lit room where Shadowhand, the guild's cunning leader, sat behind a rough-hewn table. The flickering light of a single candle cast deep shadows across his angular features, making his expression difficult to read. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. "Shadowhand," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "I come to you seeking sanctuary for this child. She is the princess, stolen away from the castle to protect her from the queen's treachery." Shadowhand leaned back in his chair, his amber eyes glinting in the candlelight as he studied me intently. "A bold claim," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "And what proof do you have of this child's royal lineage?" With trembling hands, I reached into my satchel and retrieved the pendant bearing the royal crest. I held it out to Shadowhand, the gold glinting in the dim light. "This pendant was taken from the castle on the night of her birth," I explained. "It is the only proof I have of her true identity." Shadowhand took the pendant, turning it over in his hands as he examined it closely. His expression remained unreadable, but I could see the gears turning in his mind as he weighed the risks and rewards of taking in the fugitive princess. "And what would you have me do with this information?" he asked, his gaze piercing as he met my eyes. "Taking in a royal child is no small matter, and it could bring great danger to the guild." "Please," I begged, my voice cracking with emotion. "She has nowhere else to go. The king's men are searching for her, and if they find her, they will surely kill her. I cannot protect her on my own." Shadowhand's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he turned the pendant over in his hands, the royal crest glinting in the candlelight. A slow, cunning smile spread across his face, and I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. "The king and queen's own daughter, stolen away from under their noses," he mused, his voice low and thoughtful. What a delicious irony. He looked up at me, his eyes intense and piercing. "And you, Eira Silverheart, have brought this treasure to my doorstep. The guild could not have asked for a more valuable prize." I shifted Nyx in my arms, her warm weight a comforting presence against my chest. I swallowed hard, the dryness of my throat mirroring my fear. "Then you'll help us?" I asked, my voice trembling. Shadowhand leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The king and queen have long been thorns in the guild's side," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Their cruelty and greed have brought nothing but suffering to the people of this city." He stood, his movements fluid and graceful as he crossed the room to stand before me. "By taking in their child, we strike a blow against their tyranny," he said, his voice low and fierce. "We will raise her as one of our own, mold her into a weapon to be used against them when the time is right." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words, but I knew I had no choice. Nyx's safety was all that mattered, and if the guild was willing to provide her with protection, I would do whatever it took to secure it. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I will do whatever you ask of me in return for your aid." Shadowhand's smile widened, and he reached out to take Nyx from my arms. "Welcome to the guild, little one," he murmured, his voice soft and almost tender as he gazed down at her. "Your destiny awaits." With a heavy heart, I knelt before Nyx, my hands trembling as I reached out to brush a stray curl from her face. Her emerald eyes, so full of innocence and trust, gazed up at me, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. "My sweet child," I whispered, my voice breaking as I fought back the tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks. I must leave you now in the care of these new guardians, but know that I will always watch over, my love for you never wavering. Nyx's tiny hands reached for me, her fingers curling around the fabric of my cloak as she clung to me with all her might. "Mama," she cried, her voice filled with confusion and fear. "Don't go." I closed my eyes, steeling myself against the anguish that tore at my heart. With gentle hands, I pried Nyx's fingers from my cloak, each movement feeling like a betrayal of the deepest kind. "I must go, my darling," I said, "but I will always be with you, even when we are apart." As I rose to my feet, Nyx's sobs echoed in my ears, each cry a dagger to my already bleeding heart. I forced myself to turn away, to take one step after another towards the door that would lead me away from the only thing that mattered in this world. From the shadows, I watched as the king's agents converged on the spot where I had just been, their faces twisted with frustration as they found no trace of the missing princess. Little did they know that she was now hidden away in the heart of the Thieves Guild, her true identity known only to a select few. As I slipped away into exile, my heart heavy with the weight of my sacrifice, I made a silent vow to protect Nyx from afar, to ensure that she would grow up safe and loved, even if it meant never seeing her again. For in the end, a mother's love knows no bounds, and I would gladly give up everything to keep my child safe from harm. Each season peeled another layer of paint from my ramshackle cabin deeper in the wilds. Tracks of deer and hare crisscrossed the forest path, my traps more often empty than full. Tonight, rabbit stew simmered with foraged herbs, thin enough to see the chipped clay beneath. From this desolate edge, I strained ears towards the kingdom, whispers on the wind, a traveller's murmur, any scrap of news of the kingdom. My thoughts turned to Nyx, the child I had raised as my own, now a young girl of 14. I could only imagine the challenges she faced within the Thieves Guild, the trials that would shape her into the woman she was destined to become. A pang of longing tore at my heart, the ache of a mother separated from her child, but I pushed it aside, knowing that my sacrifice had been necessary to keep her safe. As I lost myself in memories of the past, a sudden fluttering of wings jolted me back to the present. A messenger bird, its feathers ruffled from its long journey, perched on a nearby branch, a small scroll tied to its leg. With trembling fingers, I retrieved the message, my heart racing as I unrolled the parchment. The words that greeted me were like a dagger to my soul. Nyx had been arrested, thrown into the king's dungeons for a crime she did not commit. The thought of my precious girl, alone and frightened in that dank, dark place, was more than I could bear. I sprang into action, my mind racing as I called upon every ally, every favour owed, to orchestrate a daring rescue plan. I knew that Silas and Shadowhand, two of the guild's most skilled operatives, would be the key to Nyx's salvation. Under the cover of darkness, they infiltrated the dungeons, their footsteps echoing through the damp, musty corridors as they searched for Nyx's cell. My heart was in my throat as I waited for news of their success, each passing moment an eternity of torment. At last, word reached me that they had found her, bruised and beaten, her once vibrant emerald eyes dulled by the horrors she had endured. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. I watched from the shadows as they made their escape, Silas and Shadowhand moving with the grace and stealth of true masters of their craft. They incapacitated the guards with ease, their movements swift and precise, leaving no trace of their presence behind. As they emerged from the city walls, Nyx safely in tow, I caught a glimpse of her face. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a rush of love and pride that threatened to overwhelm me. But I knew I could not reveal myself, not yet. The risk was too great, the danger too real. I turned away, my heart heavy with the weight of my secrets. But knowing that Nyx was safe was enough to ease the burden, if only for a moment. As I watched her disappear into the night, I knew that my journey was far from over. But for now, I could rest easy, knowing that my sacrifice had not been in vain. Over time, I realized it was my duty to assist Nyx by any means necessary. I began to amass a wide web of confidants and supporters, ready to stand by Nyx's side on that fateful day when she at last discovers her authentic lineage. As the years passed, I organised gatherings to assemble these confederates. One such meeting was at an unassuming tavern. I stepped into the dimly lit tavern, my disguise as a travelling merchant allowing me to blend seamlessly with the patrons. The air was thick with the scent of ale and the murmur of hushed conversations. I scanned the room, my gaze settling on a group of nobles huddled in a secluded corner, their faces etched with discontent. I approached their table, my steps measured and deliberate. As I took a seat, their eyes turned to me, with suspicion in their gazes. I leaned forward, my voice low and conspiratorial. "Gentlemen, I come bearing news that could change the fate of our kingdom." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. "There is a rightful heir, a child born of royal blood, who could restore balance to our land." The nobles exchanged glances, their interest piqued. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, the prospect of a new leader sparking a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "Who is this heir?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. I smiled enigmatically. "A girl, hidden away for her own protection, a child with the strength and courage to lead us out of these dark times." I let the information sink in, gauging their reactions. Some leaned in closer, eager for more details, while others remained guarded, their loyalty to the current regime still strong. As I stepped out of the tavern, my mind was still reeling from the conversations I had just had. The support for Nyx's cause was growing, but so were the risks. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, and my suspicions centered on one person: Silas. Silas had been a constant presence in Nyx's life since she was 4 years old. He had been one of my most trusted allies, but lately his behaviour had changed. He seemed distant, distracted, and I caught him in hushed conversations with shadowy figures. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't risk Nyx's safety, not after all these years of protecting her. I decided to set a trap for Silas, to test his loyalty once and for all. I approached him one evening, my voice low and urgent. "Silas, I have news. Nyx's location has changed. She's been moved to a safe house in the eastern quarter of the city." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of deceit. He nodded, his expression unreadably. "I understand. I'll make sure to keep an eye on her." But as he turned to leave, I caught a glimmer of something in his eyes. Was it greed? Ambition? I couldn't be sure, but I knew I had to follow him. I trailed Silas through the winding streets of the city, my heart pounding in my chest. He moved with purpose, his steps quick and furtive. And then I saw him. He was meeting with a man I recognized all too well, Theron Blackleg, the king's chief investigator. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see the exchange. Silas handed Theron a small pouch, and Theron nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. My blood ran cold. Silas had betrayed us. He had sold Nyx's identity to the very people who sought to destroy her. I was crouched in the shadows, my breath slow and steady as I spied on the conversation between Silas and Theron. The moonlight cast eerie shadows on their faces, illuminating their every move. I held my breath, trying to remain as still as possible. Suddenly, a small rustling sound caught my attention. I looked down to see a cat darting across the cobblestone street, its tail flicking back and forth. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking the cat had scared the men away. But as I turned my attention back to them, I saw them both stop in their tracks, their eyes fixed on the spot where the cat had been. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized they had seen me. I braced myself for the worst, but instead of charging at me, they began to taunt me. "Well, well, well," Silas sneered. "Look what we have here. The great Eira Silverheart, reduced to spying on her own people." "You should have stayed in exile, old woman," Theron added, his voice dripping with disdain. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Eira. You won't evade me this time." I glared at them, refusing to let them see my fear. "You may be able to kill me, but you'll never find Nyx. She's safe, and she'll always be one step ahead of you. I knew I had to act fast. I lunged forward, my dagger flashing in the moonlight. But Theron was quicker, his sword slicing through the air to meet my blade, knocking me to the ground. This was it. I knew this was my end. But suddenly I heard a soft thud from above. I looked up to see Shadowhand landing on the rooftop, his eyes fixed on the scene below. He moved with the grace of a cat, his body a blur of motion as he leapt down to join the fight. Theron and Silas both turned to face him, their expressions hardened with determination. But Shadowhand was a master of stealth, and he moved with a deadly precision. As Theron lunged forward, Shadowhand dodged his attack with ease, his blade slicing through the air to strike the investigator in the chest. Blood sprayed out, coating the walls in a red ooze, and Theron crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. Silas watched in shock, his expression changing from determination to something else. A small grin appeared on his face, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. "Why, Silas?" Shadowhand demanded, his voice filled with betrayal. "Why would you betray the guild? Betray me?" Shadowhand cried. Silas's grin widened. "I'm sorry, old friend. I've learned that the only person you can truly trust is yourself. And sometimes, the ends justify the means." A violent clash of reapers began, each dueling with the skill and expertise of a master assassin. They moved with a deadly grace, their blades flashing in the moonlight. But Shadowhand was the superior fighter, his experience and skill giving him the upper hand. Silas fought with a desperation that bordered on madness, but it was no use. Shadowhand's blows were precise and deadly, each one landing with a sickening thud. Finally, Silas fell to the ground, his lifeblood pooling around him. Silas lay on the ground, his eyes wide with fear as Shadowhand loomed over him. "You betrayed the guild, Silas. You betrayed your brothers. You betrayed me." He growled, his voice like ice. "Go now into the final shadow." I watched in horror as Shadowhand plunged his sword into Silas's neck, the blood gushing out like a fountain. Silas's eyes widened in shock, and he gurgled out his last words, "I'm sorry." I couldn't believe what I was seeing, as I realized that the man I had trusted had betrayed us all. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the bodies of my enemies. I looked down at the lifeless forms, my heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge that I had just witnessed. I trudged through the winding streets, my eyes scanning the rooftops for any sign of danger. It was a habit born of necessity, a reminder of the constant threat that loomed over us all. I had grown accustomed to living in the shadows, always on edge, always prepared for the worst. As I walked, my mind wandered back to the events that had transpired. The meeting with Silas, the revelation of his betrayal. It still felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal on a scale that was hard to comprehend. I thought I knew him, trusted him, but it seemed I was wrong. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of steps behind me. I quickened my pace, my hand instinctively going to the dagger at my belt. I recognized the approach, the determined stride, and my grip relaxed. It was Shadowhand. "Where are you headed, Eira?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. "I'm going to check on Nyx," I replied, my eyes scanning the rooftops once more. He fell into step beside me, his long strides eating up the distance between us. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crunch of our feet on the cobblestones. "What's on your mind, Eira?" he asked eventually, his tone gentle. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but Shadowhand had become a trusted ally, a brother in all but blood. "I'm worried about Nyx," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's growing up, and I fear she's beginning to question her origins." Shadowhand's expression turned thoughtful. "It's natural. She's been living with the Thieves Guild for years now. She's starting to remember pieces of her past, I suppose." We walked on in silence for a while, our footsteps echoing off the walls. I could sense the weight of our shared concern. "When will you let her go?" I asked. Shadowhand's eyes turned sad. "I'm not sure, Eira, not yet. She's not ready." I stopped walking, my heart heavy. I knew that Shadowhand was trying to protect us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing with fire. Nyx was growing up, and soon she would realize the truth. I turn to Shadowhand, my eyes searching his face. What happens when she finds out? Shadowhand's expression turned cold, calculating. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Eira. For now, we just focus on keeping her safe. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of our shared secrets. But I knew that eventually, Nyx would uncover the truth, and our world would change forever. I continue to watch Nyx from the shadows, my eyes fixed on her as she moves through the streets of the city. She's grown into a strong and capable young woman with a fire in her soul that can't be extinguished. I'm proud of her, but my heart aches with every passing day. I know I can't keep her hidden forever, but I'm not ready to let her go yet. Shadowhand, the leader of the Thieves Guild, seems to agree with me. He's been watching her too, ever since she started to remember fragments of her past. He says she's not ready, that she needs more time to grow. But I sense a change in her. She's distant and lost, and I can feel her wanting more. More than what she has now, more than what she's been given. I've seen her look at people with a longing in her eyes, and I know she's searching for something. I've tried to talk to Shadowhand about it, but he just shakes his head. Give her time, he says. She's fine. But I know he's wrong. I know she's not fine. She's restless, and she's searching. And I know that one day, she'll find what she's looking for, no matter how hard I try to stop her. I sense that when she finally uncovers her true identity, she will gain an ally she never realized she had. Until then, I plan to remain patient, anticipating the ideal opportunity to make my presence known to her.
Thank you for joining us today on Short Story Stash. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay updated on the Kingdom of Havenfall and all the new stories we post. Until next time, Story Stashers.